Dear friends, welcome to this very special evening tonight. I will introduce our speaker a little later. We will, as always, start with different prayers in different languages. We would like to welcome our friends from Malaysia as it's about 7 in the morning. We're very grateful that they joined us. Please, Mr. Liban, please go ahead.
Yeah, all right. The part of prayer, is it?
Yes.
In English. All right. Glory be to thee, O Lord my God. Abase not him whom thou hast exalted through the power of thine everlasting sovereignty, and remove not far from thee him whom thou hast caused to enter the tabernacle of thine eternity. Will thou cast away, O my God, him whom thou hast overshadowed with thy lordship, and will thou turn away from thee, O my desire, him to whom thou hast been a refuge? Canst thou degrade him, whom thou hast uplifted, or forget him, whom thou hast enabled to remember thee? Glorified, immensely glorified art thou. Thou art he who from everlasting had been the king of the entire creation and its prime mover, and thou wilt to everlasting remain the lords of all created things and their ordainer. Glorified art thou, O my God, if thou ceasest to be merciful unto thy servants, who then will show mercy unto them? And if thou refusest to succor thy loved ones, who is there that can succor them? Glorified, immensely glorified art thou. Thou art adored in thy truth, and thee do we all verily worship, and thou art manifest in thy justice, and to thee do we all verily bear witness. Thou art in truth beloved in thy grace. No God is there but thee, the help in peril, the self-subsisting. Baha'u'llah.
Okay, let's pray. Sebutlah lagu di bumiku, wahai putera, sebutlah lagu di bumiku, supaya di surgaku aku dapat ingat di kau, supaya di surgaku aku dapat ingat di kau. Demikianlah mata diriku dan dirimu akan dihiburkan. Demikianlah mata diriku dan dirimu akan dihiburkan.
Var mıdır Tanrı'dan başka sorunları çözen? Söyle, odur Tanrı, Subhandır Tanrı. Herkes onun kuludur ve herkes onun buyruğu ile ayakta durur.
Thank you so much, Mr. Luban, Mr. Liu, Juliet, and of course, Quantagan. Thank you, friends, for joining us tonight. Tonight is a very special evening for us and for me and for a few of the friends who are here. Adib has been a son to many people, a nephew to many people. I want to call him Dr. Adib Masumian, but he doesn't let me. But you just remember that he's a doctor, but this will happen in due time. I would like to acknowledge Dr. Bijan Masumian and Mrs. Masumian, who participated in this beautiful evening, as well as Mr. Naim Nabil Akbar, the Ustad. And of course, all of you, and bonsoir, gibi, 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 gibi. I will introduce Adib to you, and after that, Adib will have all the time in this world to tell us all about Abdu'l-Bahá in Europe. Mr. Adib Masumian received his bachelor's degree in communication studies and his master's in learning technologies from the University of Texas. During his last year of graduate school, he spent a summer abroad in Jordan, of all places, to study the fundamentals of classical Arabic with the goal of being able to understand the Arabic Bahá'í writings well enough to be able to translate them. He has been working in the field of e-learning for the past 10 years. Adib has a website which features more than 300 of his provisional translations of the Arabic and Persian Bahá'í writings. Adib Jan, thank you so very much for accepting our invitation. The floor is yours.
Furuzande John, thank you for agreeing to have me. And I have to set expectations by saying that the only doctorate I have is an honorary one from the University of Furuzande Masrur. But thank you, as always, for your unfailing kindness. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen without further ado. Okay, you should be seeing my presentation in full screen mode. Is that the case?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for confirming that. So I want to thank you again, Furuzande Khanum and everyone else for being here. I'm very happy to be here with you all tonight. As was mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you all about Abdu'l-Bahá's second journey throughout Europe in the form that it was chronicled by one of his secretaries, Mirza Maḥmúd Zarghani. And I'm calling it Abdu'l-Bahá's second journey in that continent because he had previously gone there, meaning Europe, in 1911. But that journey is outside the scope of the chronicle covered in this presentation. And before I actually dive into the real content, I wanted to start by giving just a bit of background on the original chronicle and the history of its publication and translation, since this has been a source of confusion for some people. The chronicle was originally written in Persian and in 2 volumes. This is volume 1, which covers Abdu'l-Bahá's travels in America from April to December 1912. It was first published in Bombay in 1914, and then reprinted twice in Germany in the 1980s. In 1998, an English translation of it, which was done by the late Mohi Sobhani and his wife, the late Shirley Macias, was published by George Ronald, who then reprinted the book with a new cover in 2012. And just a quick note to say, for those of you who are curious, that apart from this new cover, the second printing of the translation is totally identical to the first printing in terms of content. And then we have volume 2, which covers Abdu'l-Bahá's subsequent travels throughout Europe, and which is the focus of this presentation. My translation of it was just published by George Ronald, and I also put together a supplement to it, which is freely available online. The supplement features transcripts of 200 talks or other verbal remarks by Abdu'l-Bahá of various provenances and degrees of authenticity that align with the timeline of this volume, but which may not have been quoted in it. So in a sense, it's kind of meant to flesh out the words of Abdu'l-Bahá that were recorded in the original volume. The supplement also contains my translations of 27 tablets from Abdu'l-Bahá regarding his journey to the West, and all of those translations were reviewed for accuracy at the Baha'i World Center. Additionally, it includes my translation of a fairly short biography of Mirza Maḥmúd Zarghani, who wrote the 2 volumes of the original chronicle, and which was written by Azizullah Soleimani. In many cases, the full transcripts of the talks Zarghani mentions in this volume of his chronicle are not actually included there, presumably for lack of space. I mean, his book could only be so big, after all. But early translations of them into English can be found in the supplement, making it a pretty important companion to the book, and it's also the reason I'm dwelling on it so much. One thing that makes the 2 volumes of this chronicle unique, and especially important, is that they seem to have been reviewed by Abdu'l-Bahá himself. At the end of each volume, Maḥmúd Zarghani mentions explicitly that he presented Abdu'l-Bahá with his account. And we also have an eyewitness record of this from Ahmad Sohrab, one of Abdu'l-Bahá's other secretaries. And it is probably for this reason that in a letter from the Universal House of Justice dated April 30th, 1984, they refer to the original volumes of this chronicle as constituting, quote, a reliable account of Abdu'l-Bahā's travels in the West and an authentic record of his utterances, end quote. And to my mind, this means that while the words attributed to Abdu'l-Bahá in it don't have the status of sacred text because they weren't written by Abdu'l-Bahá himself, rather they were spoken, they still definitely carry much more weight than unverified pilgrim's notes. I'll also pause here briefly to say I think someone may have their microphone unmuted, so if you might kindly address that, I think we'd appreciate it. So now, having said all that, let's go ahead and dive into the second volume. Obviously, there's only so much I can cover in this limited amount of time, so I'm just going to give you highlights from each stage of Abdu'l-Bahā's journey. On December 5th, 1912, Abdu'l-Bahá concludes his journey throughout the United States and sets sail for England, arriving there about a week later. Then, on January 6, 1913, he takes a short trip to Scotland, returning to England on January 10th. On January 21st, he leaves England for France, where he stays for more than 2 months. On April 1st, he sets off for Germany, and then a week after that, he goes to Hungary. 10 days later, he travels to Austria. Then, on April 24th, he returns to Germany, and then on the 1st of May, he returns to France. Once again, he stays in that country for a considerable period, this time a month and a half, and eventually on June 13th, he sets sail from France to Egypt, bidding farewell to the West at last. He stays in Egypt for 5.5 months before finally setting sail on December 2nd for the Holy Land, where he arrives a few days later on December 5th. So, to begin, Abdu'l-Bahá and his retinue set sail from America on December 5th, 1912. They sailed on the Celtic, which was an ocean liner owned by the White Star Line, a British company. He stayed in a stateroom on the upper deck, while his retinue lodged in the lower deck, but they all spent their time together for the most part. He would drink Persian tea every morning and afternoon during this voyage, sometimes in his room, sometimes outside, and he would often take walks in front of his room before having his lunch and dinner. In fact, he was very fond of walking as a form of exercise. In spite of his advanced age, being almost 70 at the time, he did it all the time, and his long walks are mentioned several times throughout this chronicle. The circumstances of the voyage changed from day to day. Sometimes the waters were calm, at others the ocean became turbulent, and Maḥmúd Zarghani mentions the rising and falling of towering waves at one point. Also, there was a band of some sort, probably an orchestra, that would play on a stage inside the ship several times after each meal over the course of the day to entertain the passengers. I've mentioned Abdu'l-Bahā's retinue. To be more specific, this consisted of Mirza Maḥmúd Zarghani, who wrote down everything that was happening. He is the reason that we have this chronicle in the first place. Mirza Ahmad Sohrab, who served as Abdu'l-Bahā's interpreter, translating his talks and other remarks into English in real time, and Sayyid Asadullah Rumi, who often prepared Abdu'l-Bahā's meals. It's worth mentioning that Ahmad Sohrab also wrote his own English account of everything that was happening in the form of daily letters he would send to a Baha'i in America. These letters are not published. They're held at the Baha'i National Archives in Wilmette, Illinois. But the staff there kindly provided me with scans of the letters at my request, and these were very useful to my work because they often filled in gaps or provided clarification on certain details recorded by Maḥmúd Zarghani. And you're going to see some examples of that as we go on. So on December 5th, which was the first day of Abdu'l-Bahá's voyage from New York to Liverpool, he made these remarks about the journey throughout America he had just concluded. The significance of this journey will become known in the future. Up until the present time, such a thing has not happened before, and has never been witnessed in any age, that a person from the East should travel to the farthest cities of the West, teaching the cause of God, promulgating its new precepts, and expounding upon questions of theology, in temples and in gatherings of various peoples, with such resolve and conviction that none is able to reject or object to them. On the contrary, all have been enamored of and enraptured by these ideas, and express their deepest reverence for them. A few days later, on December 10th, or December 9th, according to Ahmad Sohrab, Abdu'l-Bahá rewards a ship attendant for his trustworthiness. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, "The master offered a fruit basket to one of the attendants. As it happened, a small box that belonged to him had fallen into that basket. After a few minutes, the attendant brought the box back to the master. The master rejoiced at the trustworthiness of this attendant, so much so that he gave the box back to him and tipped him $1. He said to the attendant, 'Your honesty and trustworthiness have pleased me greatly.' The master then gave a lengthy exposition on the merits of trustworthiness. This talk was enlightening and served to remind those present of the benefits of this virtue." Among these remarks on this virtue, Sohrab writes that Abdu'l-Bahá referred to trustworthiness as the most brilliant jewel in the diadem which crowns man's heavenly attributes. And that one snippet recorded by Sohrab seems to be the only direct quote from this lengthy exposition on the merits of trustworthiness that has survived. On December 13th, 1912, the ship arrives in Liverpool. And we're just going to do one highlight from Abdu'l-Bahá's brief stay in Liverpool, and that concerns the talk he gave at a Baptist church called the Pembroke Chapel. The church was packed with people on that occasion. Ahmad Sohrab notes that 1,500 people attended, rather incredibly. And Abdu'l-Bahá spoke to them on the essential unity of all religions, the detriments of blind imitation, the spread of this new and wondrous cause, i.e. the Baha'i faith, and the greatness and veracity of Islam, meaning the status of Islam as a true religion of divine origin. Abdu'l-Bahá is applauded vigorously both before and after his talk, and he closes with a prayer at the request of the Reverend Donald Fraser, who showers him with even more praise afterwards. As with many of Abdu'l-Bahá's talks mentioned in this presentation, a translation of this one into English can be found in the online supplement of the book. From there, Abdu'l-Bahá goes to London, where he is greeted at Lime Street Station by a group of Baha'is that includes Lady Blomfield, who pleads with Abdu'l-Bahá to stay at her home, and he eventually agrees to do this. Describing that scene, Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, "The cries of jubilation they raised were so loud as to draw the attention of those around them, and demonstrate to those onlookers the ardor of their devotion to the Master." A couple of days later, on December 18th, Abdu'l-Bahá meets with the eminent Orientalist Professor Edward Granville Brown for the first time in more than 20 years. The last time they had crossed paths was in Akka, when Brown had his famous interview with Baha'u'llah in April 1890. Brown began their conversation by wanting to apologize for some of his past mistakes. I'm not going to expand on those here in the interest of time, but suffice it to say that Abdu'l-Bahá preferred to be merciful and insist that they change the subject, saying, "We should discuss other matters, matters that will generate feelings of love." At one point, as they were discussing the importance of balancing knowledge with a good character, Abdu'l-Bahá said, If the acquisition of knowledge is coupled with the best of characters, that knowledge will bring about marvelous results. Material progress and civilization alone will not suffice, and the acquisition of knowledge by itself will not result in complete prosperity. At Brown's request, he meets with Abdu'l-Bahá again the next day, being December 19th, and Abdu'l-Bahá would go on to meet with Brown a third and final time in Paris a few months later on March 9th. In his own account, Ahmad Sohrab writes that Abdu'l-Bahá and Edward Brown conversed in Persian during each of these meetings, and that the first one lasted for nearly an hour, while the second one went for 2 hours. Let's jump ahead now to Christmas Day. Abdu'l-Bahá visits this factory building that was being leased to the Salvation Army Center for use as a night shelter, where he spoke to a gathering of the poor to tell them that poverty is beloved by God. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, "Those in the audience were so moved by these words, stirred to their very cores, that they repeatedly applauded the master and raised uproars of jubilation." Since this was Christmas Day, Abdu'l-Bahá treated everyone to dinner by giving them each some money. Again, Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, "So great was the clamor raised by those present, and so vigorous the praises and benedictions they heaped upon the master, that the walls of that space seemed to shake." It seems we don't know exactly how many people were present on this occasion. Maḥmúd Zarghani says there were about 500, which is actually, uncharacteristically for him, the most conservative of the available estimates. In that Ahmad Sohrab says there were 700 people, and Isabel Fraser, who took down an account of the whole occasion, says there were as many as 1,000. In any case, afterwards, Abdu'l-Bahá goes to the second floor of the building to look at the sleeping accommodations and other amenities. According to Maḥmúd Zarghani, the master considered this arrangement highly commendable, inasmuch as it was a kind service that provided support to the poor. 2 days later, on December 27th, Abdu'l-Bahá addresses another gathering of the poor, but this time at the Cedars Club. What's special about this gathering is that there were many children who believed that Abdu'l-Bahá was Santa Claus, or Father Christmas, as he's known in the UK. I think we may still have at least one unmuted mic, just FYI. So according to an account of this event by Louise Heron Oliphant, there were about 60 mothers and more than 100 children. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, "He kissed the children, caressed them tenderly, and gave each one of them a present. Whenever the children would attain his presence, cherishing the hope of his grace, they would invariably declare, 'This is the divine khezr. These are heavenly showers of grace.' This is because the children of America and Europe believe that khezr appears to children at Christmas time and gives them presents." Unmistakably a reference to Santa somehow. But to clarify, khezr is the name of a prophetic figure in Islam who is mentioned indirectly in the Quran as the spiritual guide of Moses. And to this day, I've never been able to figure out why Maḥmúd Zarghani equated him with Santa Claus or Father Christmas, but I have always found it very interesting and frankly quite amusing that he did. On New Year's Eve, Abdu'l-Bahá takes a day trip to Oxford. He starts by paying a visit to the Bahá'í professor Thomas Kelly Cheney and his wife, Elizabeth Gibson Cheney. T.K. Cheney was an invalid at this time. He was paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair, but he had written some pieces on the Bahá'í faith, and for this reason, Abdu'l-Bahá loved him very much. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes that he repeatedly kissed the professor's forehead and cheeks and tenderly stroked his face and hair with his blessed hand. From there, Abdu'l-Bahá sets out for the University of Oxford, where he speaks to a distinguished audience at Manchester College, one of the constituent colleges of the University of Oxford, and concludes the gathering with a prayer. After that, he returns to the Cheney residence and gives a talk to some professors and other university officials before going back to London. In Maḥmúd Zarghani's entry a couple of months later, on March 4th, 1913, he quotes Abdu'l-Bahá as saying that the writings of Professor Cheney will be weighed against the writings of his peers from former times, and the greatness of this cause will then become known. Then, on January 6, 1913, Abdu'l-Bahá and his retinue take a short trip to Scotland, specifically to Edinburgh, which is its capital. The next day, on January 7th, Abdu'l-Bahá visited the Outlook Tower, an old observatory that a Scottish polymath named Patrick Geddes had bought and turned into a center of learning. One of the unique things about this tower is that it had something called a camera obscura. This is a darkened chamber in which the image of an object is received through a small opening or lens and then projected onto a surface in real time, allowing viewers to watch outside scenes as if from a movie without the use of a modern camera. This is called pinhole projection. And in describing it, Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, "All the buildings and streets, the carriages and trains, the coming and going of various people, even the smoke billowing from the factories, all these took on the form of motion pictures, and this was met with ample praise from the master." In the evening, Abdu'l-Bahá speaks to the local Esperanto society about the implementation of a universal language. The venue was at capacity, with 1,000 people seated inside, so a few hundred more attendees had to stand outside. That same day, or the following day according to Ahmad Sohrab, Abdu'l-Bahá went to the Edinburgh College of Art and the North Canongate School, which Maḥmúd Zarghani calls a school for poor children. In the evening, Abdu'l-Bahá delivered an address at Rainey Hall, which was a divinity school. The gathering was organized by the Outlook Tower Society, presided over by the aforementioned Patrick Geddes, pictured here, and attended by eminent clergymen and other distinguished people. In this talk, Abdu'l-Bahá spoke about the teachings of Baha'u'llah, the calamities that have befallen the cause, and the unstoppable exaltation of God's word. When he finished speaking, some of the prominent men who were present rose to praise him. This included Dr. Alexander Hugh Freeland Barber, a Scottish gynecologist, the Reverend Alexander B. Robb, the Reverend Robert B. Drummond, and of course, Patrick Geddes himself, the chairman of that gathering. After that short trip to Scotland, Abdu'l-Bahá and his retinue returned to England. A few days into that sojourn, on January 15th, he goes to Clifton, which is a suburb of the city of Bristol. He spends the night at the Clifton Guest House, which was a hotel owned by Wellesley Tudor Pole, an early British Bahá'í. And in the evening, Abdu'l-Bahá gives a talk there on the Lesser Peace. Once again, the place was packed. And really surprisingly, Maḥmúd Zarghani writes that every member of the audience came up to Abdu'l-Bahá afterwards, kneeled before him, took hold of his hands and the hem of his garment, and sought his blessings. Mind you, they were not bowing themselves down or prostrating themselves to the ground, but getting down on one knee or both of their knees still makes for quite a sight. And indeed, it was a most impressive sight, especially for a Persian in the audience who was not a Bahá'í. This was a man named Dust Muhammad Khan, to whom Maḥmúd Zarghani refers by his state title of Mu'ayyirul Mamalik. Here is how Maḥmúd Zarghani describes that gentleman's reaction to what he was witnessing. As this scene was taking place, my eyes fell upon the Mu'ayyirul Mamalik, who had accompanied the master on this trip, meaning to Clifton, Bristol. I noticed that he was looking with complete astonishment upon the reverence and humility that the most distinguished people of England were showing before the power of this cause and the might of the master, and I saw that he was crying profusely, so much so that it aroused great tenderness within me. Indeed, to see this gentleman so profoundly affected by this scene moved me, in turn, to shed tears of ecstasy. I rejoiced in my heart of hearts and gave thanks for those promised confirmations that had been vouchsafed from the Abha kingdom. After spending the night at the Clifton Guest House, like I mentioned before, Abdu'l-Bahá and his retinue returned to London the next day. On January 17th, Abdu'l-Bahá takes a day trip to the town of Woking, where he speaks at two gatherings. First, a private luncheon at the building for a British journal called the Asiatic Quarterly Review, attended by Muslims, Christians, and certain dignitaries, and then a public event at the Shah Jahan Mosque, again attended by Muslims, Christians, and others. At the mosque, Abdu'l-Bahá speaks about the foundation and truth of the divine religions and expounds the teachings of universal peace and oneness of humanity. I believe at least some of the audience had to stand outside, and in spite of the fact that it was raining, they stayed put and listened with rapt attention. This is one of those rare cases where we actually have the full transcript of the original talk in Persian. It's kind of buried in an issue of Star of the West, which was an early Baha'i magazine. And as far as I can tell, it has not gotten much attention up until now. But my provisional translation of it into English is included in the supplement to the book, not the book itself. Abdu'l-Bahá actually concludes his Persian address, moreover, with an Arabic prayer that has a very Quranic flavor to it, showing how attuned he was to the sensibilities of his audience and the venue where he was speaking. And on that note, I think this may be the only mosque in the West that Abdu'l-Bahá ever visited, let alone spoke at, which only makes the occasion that much more remarkable. And if I'm wrong about that, I hope someone will correct me. A few days later, Abdu'l-Bahá leaves England for the last time and heads to France. As you can see from these dates, this sojourn lasted for more than 2 months. That is a lot of ground to cover, and we obviously can't do it all here, so I want to start this portion of the presentation with an overview of the places Abdu'l-Bahá went to and the people he associated with before we get into some of the specific days. Because one thing to know about Abdu'l-Bahá's time in Paris in 1913 is that he did not speak at very many large gatherings and grand halls like he did in England and other places in Western Europe. Rather, he mostly spent his time talking with visitors he received at his residence, or paying visits to various people at their homes. So these were smaller, more intimate settings. So here we have an apartment building on 30 Rue Saint-Didier, where Abdu'l-Bahá stayed for the first couple of months of this sojourn. This later became known as the Cécile Hotel, as is mentioned on this postcard. On March 19th, he and his retinue moved into the Martha Pension. This was a this was a place calling themselves a family hotel. It was located on Lauriston Street, and it is not pictured here simply because I could not find a photo of it. And here we have another postcard. This one showing the street adjoining Bois de Boulogne, a large public park where Abdu'l-Bahá would go for walks. At that time, there were 2 weekly gatherings held at the home of 2 Baha'i couples on different weeknights. On Monday nights, there was a gathering at the home of Frank Edwin Scott and Josephine Sanford Scott, American painters who had moved to France. And on Friday nights, there was one at the home of Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney, a lawyer and translator of Baha'i texts, and Laura Dreyfus Barney, a writer, artist, and social activist. Abdu'l-Bahá himself would often speak at these gatherings, and sometimes other Baha'is spoke on various topics as well. And these meetings were characterized by abundant love, warmth, and fellowship. For the most part, Abdu'l-Bahá attended both of these weekly gatherings, except for when his poor health or fatigue prevented him from doing so. And I want to take a second to note that this portrait of Josephine Scott on the left, next to Frank Edwin Scott, was taken when she was a young woman. I just used this one because I didn't have a very good portrait of her as an older woman. In reality, she was only a year younger than her husband. Just thought I'd clarify that. So, of course, Abdu'l-Bahá met with many other Baha'is while in Paris. To name just a few examples, we have Edith Sanderson, an American Baha'i who also held gatherings of her own at her home. Horace Hawley, an American Baha'i who at that time operated an art gallery in France, and then in 1914 returned to America, where he served on the National Spiritual Assembly for many years. Stanwood Cobb, an American Baha'i educator who was much younger at the time than he is in this portrait, but I did not have a photo of him as a younger man. Haji Abul Hasan Ardakani, known by his title of Haji Amin, who served as trustee of Huququllah for many years. Waliullah and Azizullah Vargha, the sons of the martyred Baha'i poet Ali Muhammad Vargha. Mirza Ali Akbar Nakhjavani, an important figure in the early Baha'i community of Baku in today's Azerbaijan, and also the father of the late Ali Nakhjavani, who served on the Universal House of Justice for 40 years. Mirza Ali Akbar Rafsanjani, a young Baha'i travel teacher, and Mirza Agha Khan Ghaem Maqami, a very wealthy Baha'i and great-grandson of Mirza Abul Qasim Farahani, known as the Ghaem Maqam, who was an eminent Persian statesman of outstanding character, who happened to have been a close friend of Baha'u'llah's father. While in France, Abdu'l-Bahá also met with several political figures, including Saleh Munir Pasha, an Ottoman diplomat who held various posts in the government of the Ottoman Empire, some of which were ministerial in nature, Rashid Pasha, who years earlier had served as governor of the province of Beirut while Abdu'l-Bahá was under house arrest in Akka, and Abdus-Samad Khan, known as Mumtaz-u Saltaneh, a Persian diplomat who held many posts in his career and was serving at that time as the Persian minister in Paris. And in addition to all those people, Abdu'l-Bahá also met with people of more mystical persuasions, such as Mira al-Fasa, who was so active in the Baha'i community of Paris that many believed her to be a Baha'i, but who in fact displayed a very keen interest in Sufism, and eventually went to India, where she became a Hindu guru, adopting for herself the title of the Mother. And Abdu'l-Bahá also met with her husband, Paul Richard, both pictured here. Additionally, he met Enayat Khan, a singer, poet, professor of musicology, and founder of the Enayati order of Sufism. So, getting into some of the specific dates now. On February 2nd, we have a lovely account of Abdu'l-Bahá encouraging the believers. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes that Mr. Alfred Bernard and his wife, Claire Bernard, then expressed to the master their regrets that they were possessed of little capacity. In response, the master said, "If the love of Baha'u'llah is present in a heart, it will be endowed with capacity. Divine love is like a spirit. When a spirit is present in a body, that body is endowed with the capacity to do anything." We were passing by a church today that was built according to the principles of Greek architecture, when my companions observed that this church was dedicated to Mary Magdalene. When one considers her outwardly, what capacity did Mary Magdalene have? She was a woman who hailed from a village. There have been many women greater than she was, women descended from the kings of the earth, or numbered with the most renowned of its denizens. Yet since the love of Christ was present in Mary Magdalene's heart, that love endowed her with such capacity that a church in France such as this one was built in her name. Thus, anyone who discovers their relationship with God will be endowed with every conceivable capacity. Then do not say, "We are bereft of capacity." When the love of Baha'u'llah is present in your hearts, you will possess every conceivable capacity and every measure of worthiness. A couple of days after that, Abdu'l-Bahá is visited by a Persian Baha'i poet named Agha Mirza Hussein Arif, who, like some other Persian Baha'is of his time, revered Abdu'l-Bahá to the point of deifying him, or making a god out of him. On that occasion, he recited these verses from a poem he wrote in praise of Abdu'l-Bahá. "Benighted do we languish in the darkness, and there's no light more glorious than thee. In truth, I swear upon Bahá himself, that no better Baha'i is there than thee. Though all see themselves as slaves to the Lord, this slave is sure no God can surpass thee. Could Moses see thy face upon the mount, all hail this best encounter, would say he. If Asia should be sick and sore afflicted, and Europe its fatal calamity, there's no physician better for this illness, indeed no better remedy than thee." After quoting these verses in his chronicle, Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, "A great many individuals, not affiliated with the faith and belonging to every land imaginable, composed such poems of praise and adoration, and presented them before the master. The majority of these he refused to accept, and he forbade them from being disseminated and published. Indeed, even the sincere praises that believers and others alike would express were, for the most part, not compatible with the master's temperament and contrary to his complete and total servitude at the divine threshold, and he would reject them accordingly." The next day, Abdu'l-Bahá and some Persian Baha'is visit the Eiffel Tower, where they take this well-known photograph. I'm sure many of you have seen it before, and now you're about to get the context for it. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, "The Persian believers wished to take a photograph with the master that day, and it was taken as he was standing underneath the Eiffel Tower, alongside a number of believers and servants of the sacred threshold. Both before the picture was taken and afterwards, those devoted souls brimmed with delight as they relished the elegant majesty and graceful grandeur of the Master's gate. A few days later, on February 12th, Abdu'l-Bahá gives an evening address to the Paris Esperanto group at the Hôtel Moderne. According to Maḥmúd Zarghani, the Master's talk roused his audience to such irrepressible excitement that they punctuated his delivery with rapturous laughter, praise, and applause. Such was their state even as they had dinner afterwards, and as the banquet drew to a close, each and every one of them approached the Master and expressed their sincere devotion and deference to him. Those who had not previously had a chance to attain the Master's presence requested permission to do so. And when it was granted them, they asked him for the address of the residence where he was staying. Again, as with several of the talks mentioned in this presentation, a translation of this one into English can be found in the online supplement to the book. About a week later, while some of the Baha'is of Paris are gathered at Abdu'l-Bahá's apartment, he rallies them with rousing admonitions. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, "Among the remarks the Master made in the talk he gave to the public gathering that morning were these: Nothing but the cause of God is worthy of your attachment. All affairs but those which pertain to God are fleeting and undeserving of mention." That day, the Master repeatedly encouraged the Baha'is, in particular Miss Sanderson, to teach the cause, exhorting them with these words: "Speak at the gatherings. Be as a flame of fire and a brilliant star. Thereby you shall illumine this city. I work day and night to help you spread your wings, that you might help others to progress, and guide them to promulgate the cause in turn. Otherwise, should a person not be aided and confirmed in the cause of God, he will bear no fruit, and his life shall have failed to make its mark." Skipping ahead by a little more than a month now, on March 27th, or March 31st, according to Ahmad Sohrab, Abdu'l-Bahá met with Henri Moser, who was a Swiss traveler and art collector, and also with his wife Sophie. Henri Moser was about the same age as Abdu'l-Bahá. He had traveled in Central Asia, including to Bukhara and Ashgabad, and he had accumulated a priceless collection of Oriental weapons and artifacts. Abdu'l-Bahá speaks with them for a while. Maḥmúd Zarghani actually has a pretty extensive record of their exchanges, and the Mosers respond very favorably to Abdu'l-Bahā's remarks. Here's a snippet of what they said. "We are well informed of this cause. It is truly a light from the East, and it will surely become the means through which peace is established. The thing about this cause which truly demands careful attention is that spiritual power that will conduce to peace and unity. Were it not for this, we too have held many gatherings that were all devoted to peace, yet every one of them has proven futile and yielded no effort." At the end of their conversation, the Mosers repeatedly invite Abdu'l-Bahá to come to their residence for the summer, but he politely declines the invitation, insisting that he and his retinue are on a mission and that they need to see it through to the end. This takes us to the first of Abdu'l-Bahā's two brief sojourns in Germany. Shortly after arriving in the city of Stuttgart, while gathered with some of the Baha'is there, he said, "Behold what the grace and bounty of Baha'u'llah have done. Observe where we are and where you are. See how this grace and bounty have gathered us together in one place, how they have bound the hearts to one another, and delighted the souls with the glad tidings of God. What bonds are these? What love is this, that derive their power from no earthly source? To outward seeming, neither had we heard the name of Stuttgart, nor had you all heard the name of Nur. The power of the word of God has rent the veils asunder. How wonderfully has this power united us! How completely has it bound the hearts together! How remarkably has it made the East and the West as one! How it has brought the far removed so close together and turned strangers into friends." The day after that, Abdu'l-Bahá takes a day trip to Esslingen, where he attends a festival held in his honor on behalf of the Bahá'í children. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, When the master arrived, he found that all the children, dressed in their school uniforms, had formed a neatly ordered line, extending from the entrance of the building all the way to its main room. They all expressed their reverence for the master and exclaimed, "Allahu Akbar." The master walked gracefully among those children, handing sweets to each and every one of them and caressing them tenderly. And here are some of the remarks Abdu'l-Bahá himself made at this children's festival. "What precious children these are! I beseech God to send down from the heavens a blessing on these children, that even as the flowers of the most glorious garden, they may flourish with verdure. May the light of the love of God make each of them as brilliant lamps, and may they derive their portion of splendor shining from the day star of the most glorious paradise. These children are the fruits of the tree of the love of God. They are the saplings of the Bahá kingdom. Their hearts are pure to the utmost, and their souls are as undefiled and delicate as can be. I hope, therefore, that even as pearls, they may be nurtured in the shell of the love of God." After spending a few more days in Germany, Abdu'l-Bahá sets out for Hungary. Shortly after his arrival in Budapest, Abdu'l-Bahá visits the eminent professor, traveler, and Orientalist Armin Vámbéry. Here is Maḥmúd Zarghani's summary of that visit. In the afternoon, the master paid a visit to the renowned philosopher Professor Vámbéry, who was sick at the time. This professor had a strong command of Persian, Arabic, and Turkish. The professor listened to the master's words and was profoundly affected by what he heard. He considered the master's mighty endeavors to be truly extraordinary. On several occasions from that point forward, he lauded the principles and ordinances of this revelation as the most potent cure for the inveterate diseases afflicting the peoples of the earth, and he arose to promote the principles of this most great cause with the utmost devotion and conviction. Vámbéry called on Abdu'l-Bahá the next day, but he wasn't home. And Abdu'l-Bahá would pay Vámbéry a second visit the day after that, on April 14th. Following Abdu'l-Bahā's departure from Hungary, he and Vámbéry have a little more correspondence that you can find in the full book, including facsimiles of a letter that Vámbéry wrote to Abdu'l-Bahá in Persian, kindly supplied to me for inclusion in the book by the Bahá'í World Center. And it is very much worth noting that Vámbéry accepted the Bahá'í faith as a result of Abdu'l-Bahā's visit to Hungary. Speaking of April 14th, Abdu'l-Bahá gave an address that evening to the Turanian or Turanian Society at the Hungarian National Museum. It was attended by hundreds of people in spite of unseasonably cold weather. Remember, this was in April, and yet Maḥmúd Zarghani mentions that a fierce blizzard was raging just the day before. This is one of those rare cases, once again, where we have an authenticated Persian transcript of this talk. It was actually made available on the Baha'i Reference Library just a couple of months ago, and you can find my provisional translation of it into English in the supplement to the book. Here's an excerpt from Maḥmúd Zarghani's description of that event. The imposing power he projected at that gathering captivated the attention and enraptured the hearts of those present more than on any other such occasion. Indeed, their ecstasy could be likened to the commotion of the gathering crowd on the day of resurrection. However, the sudden onset of such intensely cold weather must have posed a shock to Abdu'l-Bahā's system, as it were, because the very next day he fell sick with a cold that waxed and waned for the next several months. It didn't really leave him, in fact, until he finally returned to Egypt in the summer, a few months from now, where it was, of course, much warmer. A few days after that, Abdu'l-Bahá leaves Hungary for Austria, staying in Vienna for about a week. He had been invited there by two theosophists, Johann Kreutz and Marie Thaler, and on his first full day there, Abdu'l-Bahá says the following to both of them. Your love is the reason I have come here. I have come to see you, not to go on leisurely excursions, for we are in search of people, and wherever we find them, it brings us matchless joy. We hope that this meeting with us will yield results that shall illumine the hearts and irradiate the souls with the light of supreme guidance. Thereby may every eye be brightened and every heart attain everlasting joy and bliss. Thereby may all come together with tranquil souls and well-assured hearts beneath the shade of the pavilion of the oneness of humanity. And thereby may eternal peace, harmony, welfare, and prosperity be realized on earth. For we are all the members of humankind, all the servants of one loving God. Several days later, Marie Thaler mentions to Abdu'l-Bahá that she is a Bahá'í. Remember, she was a theosophist at first, supposedly. And I assume that means she embraced the faith because of Abdu'l-Bahā's visit. That same day, or 2 days later by Ahmad Sohrab's account, Abdu'l-Bahá goes to the residence of a certain Mrs. Lukaneder and her son Paul. We don't seem to know his mother's first name. It's just Mrs. Lukaneder. And their residence was high up in a new apartment building. The Lukaneder's home functioned as the lodge of the local Theosophical Society. And it was there that Abdu'l-Bahá gave an extensive address that evening, even though he had completely exhausted himself just getting there. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, although the master was very tired as a result of the cold he had caught in Budapest, he walked up 120 steps of that building nevertheless to get to the main hall of the Theosophical Society. This because the building was still new, and an elevator had not yet been installed to transport people. When he reached the 4th floor, he did not enter the main hall at first, owing to his great fatigue. Instead, he initially went to a different room and conversed with certain individuals. One can well imagine the great strain that must have been placed on the master's body when he then went to the public gathering. And in fact, Abdu'l-Bahá himself attests to this fatiguing experience in one of his tablets, which I have translated in the supplement to the book. Here is the relevant passage. Especially taxing was one night in particular, when I went to a place where there were 120 stairs made of marble that was cold as ice. I ascended them with exceeding powerlessness and fatigue, and then spoke for 2 hours without interruption. I promoted the word of God, and my talk was accompanied by a comprehensive translation. A few days later, Abdu'l-Bahá and his retinue have an interesting experience at the Stadtpark, or city park. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, once his visitors had been dismissed, expressing the utmost devotion and ecstasy as they departed, the master said, today is a good day. Let us walk for a bit in the garden. He uses the word Bāgh, which means garden, but his meaning was Stadtpark. The master went outside with his attendants, who were wearing their Persian hats and other attire. This drew the attention of onlookers from every direction, which prompted the master to remark, this clothing of ours is itself an announcer of the cause. When the master reached the park in the center of the city, he found a large number of people there. They all turned to look at him, and most of them approached him from the various corners of the park with curiosity. Mr. Wilhelm Herregel and some other friends discussed the cause of God with them, and provided them with the addresses of both the master's hotel and also the residences of certain believers. On his last day in Vienna, Abdu'l-Bahá meets with Baroness Bertha von Suttner, who in 1905 had become the first woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Maḥmúd Zarghani has given this short description of their meeting. Among the other important individuals who were thoroughly cheered and illumined by having had the bounty of being in the master's presence was Baroness Bertha von Suttner. This woman was an earnest promoter of peace. She was deeply respected and widely renowned, and the master showed her great loving kindness. He spoke to her of universal peace and the Bahá'í faith, and this served to gladden her heart, broaden her mind, and brighten her soul. She was then dismissed, and she displayed the utmost devotion as she departed the master's presence. So that's a fairly limited account of the occasion, but Ahmad Sohrab did record quite a bit of Abdu'l-Bahā's conversation with the Baroness, in English, of course, and you can find his transcript of that in the supplement to the book. Abdu'l-Bahá then returns to Germany and stays there for about a week. During a gathering with some Baha'is, Abdu'l-Bahá has occasion to speak glowingly of Mirza Abul Fazl, the eminent Baha'i scholar, author, and teacher. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, Mr. Friedrich Schweizer then mentioned the translation of certain books written for the cause of God, and spoke highly of the brilliant proof of Mirza Abul Fazl in particular. The master said, I love him very much. In order to leave himself free to serve the cause of God, he has not married. He is always occupied with promoting the word of God. He has not rested for a single moment of the days of his life. He has either engaged himself in teaching the cause, or set himself to composing treatises, or devoted himself to traveling, or spent his days in prison. He is an exceedingly blessed individual, and it is for this reason that I love him dearly. Ahmad Sohrab's account of Abdu'l-Bahá's response to Schweizer is largely the same as what Zarghani has recorded, but Sohrab's version adds this notable remark about Mirza Abul Fazl. He is greater even than the apostles, meaning, of course, the apostles of Christ. And Shoghi Effendi would go on to name, quite fittingly, Mirza Abul Fazl as one of the 19 apostles of Baha'u'llah. On Abdu'l-Bahá's last day in Germany, he gives many, many words of farewell to the Baha'is of Stuttgart. In fact, Maḥmúd Zarghani has recorded several paragraphs worth of parting words and final counsels. But I want to give you just a sample of those here. Abdu'l-Bahá says, I want to say goodbye to you, but at the same time, my heart wishes to stay with you. Meeting is just as sweet as parting is bitter. But neither our farewells nor the distance between us will prevent our nearness to one another, inasmuch as the love of Baha'u'llah has bound us with ties that can never be broken. Should the distance between the farthest ends of the earth be between us, it would never preclude the closeness of our hearts and souls, for spiritual sentiments are beyond any doubt. When people meet one another, it is their spirits that take pleasure in this meeting, not their bodies, and their souls that experience degrees of spiritual feeling, not their flesh. Thus, it is this spiritual feeling which is continually present. I commit you all to the sheltering shade of the protection and aid of Baha'u'llah. Abdu'l-Bahá then returns to France for the last time, staying there for nearly a month and a half. To give you an overview of this final sojourn in Paris before getting into some specific dates, Abdu'l-Bahá stays at the Baltimore Hotel at first, then moves back into the aforementioned Martha Pension family hotel. Here you can see a postcard of the Baltimore Hotel with a note at the top, I think in Ahmad Sohrab's handwriting. It says, this is the hotel in which the master lives on first floor. And that should be the first floor. English was not Sohrab's native language, of course. And the note is dated May 1st, 1913. Similar to the last time Abdu'l-Bahá was in Paris, he mostly gathered with Baha'is and others in smaller, more intimate settings at his hotel or their own residences. And this did include the weekly evening gatherings at the Scots on Monday nights and the Dreyfus Barneys on Friday nights. And unfortunately, he was still dealing with that lingering cold he had caught in Budapest that I mentioned before. Something very interesting happens the day after Abdu'l-Bahá returns to Paris. I'll let Maḥmúd Zarghani explain it. He says, the fame of the grandeur of the master's journey had reached such great proportions that a French newspaper featuring an extensive article which discussed his travels and mentioned the spread of the teachings of peace and unity was shown at that gathering. Included in the article was a full-page color illustration of the master, in which he was standing before a large crowd of Muslims at a mosque in Constantinople, or Istanbul. He had been depicted while speaking, suggesting that he was imparting counsels. His hands were raised up, and all those present were listening with the utmost humility. The caption accompanying the image stated that a new prophet of Islam was summoning the followers of the various religions to oneness and unity. Seeing this image brought an ample smile to the master's face. And here on the right is the image in question. It is, of course, an entirely fictitious illustration of Abdu'l-Bahá. He never spoke at any such mosque in Istanbul. And it was published, however, in the weekly supplement to a French journal called Le Petit Journal. And while Maḥmúd Zarghani did paraphrase the caption in the description we just read, A more direct translation from the original French caption would be the new prophet of Islam, Abdu'l-Bahá preaching calm and brotherhood in a mosque in Constantinople. Jumping ahead by about 3 weeks, we have this touching and fascinating anecdote from Abdu'l-Bahá, as recorded by Maḥmúd Zarghani, who writes, "Shortly after nightfall, the master went to the home of that handmaid of God, Miss Sanderson. He showed her great loving kindness and commended the way she conversed with him in Persian. He instructed that she read the poems of the Blessed Beauty and commit them to memory. After promising her that she would be confirmed and aided to progress, he said, 'I have not studied Arabic. When I was a child, I had a book of the Bab's prayers in the handwriting of the Blessed Beauty, and I very much yearned to read it. At night, I would wake him, get out of bed, and peruse this book. And the fervor of my quest, the intensity of my longing would move me to tears. Eventually, I saw that I understood Arabic well. My old friends know well that I have not studied Arabic, and yet I speak and write it better than the most eloquent of Arabs. I hope that you make great progress in learning the Persian language.'" And in fact, Abdu'l-Bahā's hope would be fulfilled in that many years later, Edith Sanderson translated Durus ad-Diyanat, a presentation on the Bahá'í teachings from Persian into English. And this was published under the title Lessons in Religion. This treatise was written by Sheikh Muhammad Ali Ghaini, an apostle of Baha'u'llah and the nephew of Nabila Akbar, who was himself an apostle of Baha'u'llah. It is also worth mentioning that this encouragement from Abdu'l-Bahá was constant and widespread. In Maḥmúd Zarghani's entry for the very next day, being May 20th, he writes, "At the end of that gathering, he encouraged Ruhiye Khanum," that is a reference to Miss Sanderson, not the future wife of Shoghi Effendi, who was a toddler at this time, once again to read the Persian tablets and verses. This encouragement was also not limited just to Edith Sanderson. We have several tablets from Abdu'l-Bahá to other Western Baha'is extending the same encouragement. So we, today, might do well to ponder the importance of learning the original languages of revelation. At least that's my opinion. This takes us to May 23rd, which is a doubly blessed day for Baha'is because it is the day when the Bab declared his mission and also the day Abdu'l-Bahá was born. This twofold significance was not lost even on those early Baha'is in France, and they cherished the opportunity to commemorate these anniversaries with Abdu'l-Bahá in person. Here is how Maḥmúd Zarghani's entry for that day begins. According to solar reckoning and European calendars, this day marked the birth of Abdu'l-Bahá and the declaration of the Bab. May the spirits of all living things be a sacrifice for their beneficence. From early in the morning until nighttime, the believers and other friends attained the Master's presence with bouquets of flowers to extend their felicitations. They expressed their utter joy and delight, saying, "Today is a great day. It is the day of your birth, and also the day on which the Bab declared his mission." The Master said, "Indeed, as this day marks the declaration of the Bab, the day when that sun dawned forth and announced the greatest of glad tidings, it is an exceedingly blessed day. By chance, it also happens that I was born on this day." I couldn't help but smile at that when I first read it, because you can't help but notice that Abdu'l-Bahá has relegated himself to a mere footnote to the events of that day, mentioning his birth only in the most incidental of terms. And this is just it's really just one of countless instances of his exemplary humility. Later that day, Abdu'l-Bahá attends the Paris Spring Flower Show. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, "There were many flowers of all kinds that had been arranged most neatly and exquisitely. Their appearance from every side filled all those present with vigor and gladness. In every corner of that space, there was some color or freshness, some fragrance or delicacy that stirred a crowd to great delight." As it was the anniversary of the Bab's declaration and that of the Master's birth, the fact that this event was, by some happy coincidence, also being held on the same day rejoiced the eager Baha'is in attendance and added to the attraction and excitement that those lovers of the Master were exhibiting. It was as if that festival had been held specifically to commemorate this auspicious anniversary, and it seemed that all the things of that place had been moved in their ecstasy from beholding the master to sing songs of congratulations. Jan Yashin, the author of ʻAbdu'l-Bahá in France, 1911 and 1913, has added these details to that event. This year's open-air exhibit was dedicated to fruit trees and garden implements, meaning tools. Inside the hothouses were orchids, roses, pinks, pelargoniums, also known as geraniums, etc. How Abdu'l-Bahá must have enjoyed walking among the mauve and pink sweet peas, dull red rhododendrons, and salmon pink hortensias, which were the highlights of this year's show. And you can see examples of all those flowers pictured here to the right, just to make it a bit more concrete. Let's skip forward now to June 11th, the eve of Abdu'l-Bahā's departure from Paris, when he addressed these parting words to the Baha'is there. I was in your midst for some time. I have felt and still feel the utmost love towards you. My heart constantly swelled with your love. I have lit the candle of God's love in the niche of your hearts and expounded the divine admonitions for you. My hope is such that you may strive so that with every passing day, the light of God will make you ever more luminous, and the splendors of the most glorious kingdom will shine with increasing resplendence. Rest not at all as you guide the people aright. Revive these dead ones. Alert the uninformed. Enkindle the despondent and dispirited with the fire of the love of God. I will ever be waiting to hear good news from you. The next day, Abdu'l-Bahá left Paris for the port city of Marseille, and then set sail for Egypt the day after that, never to return to the West. As you can see from these dates, his voyage to Egypt was a very short one, so I'm only going to share one highlight from that stage of his journey. It's actually from the last night of his voyage, as described here by Maḥmúd. He writes, "That night too was a blessed night. Although the wind was blowing fiercely, the sea was calm, and the weather was clear. In the radiance of the moonlight, the water shimmered like a spotless and sparkling mirror. The sound of the surging waves lapping the ship on either side resembled the billowing and babbling of two flowing rivers, and the ship itself seemed to whine like a young fatling, meaning a young lamb or calf, priding itself in the most great mystery it was carrying. The hearts of his devoted attendants throbbed constantly with this heavenly anthem. This is the mighty mystery, none other than the branch of old, that great secret in whom do we the mercy of the Lord behold." And afterwards they would gently murmur these words. How great indeed this blessed night, which far outranks the best of days. 'Tis on this night our sun so bright will cease to shed his western rays. His trips through Europe's land and seas upon this night have reached their end. His beauteous light, if God should please, will soon to eastern skies extend. That precious friend will disembark to lay his steps on eastern ground, and thereupon will all remark, it's here alone that heaven's found. That takes us to Egypt. Now, this is a very long period, about 5.5 months, and unlike the western portions of Maḥmúd's chronicle, he actually kept this section pretty condensed, so I'm going to emulate his approach in this portion of the presentation. To start with, I want to give a high-level overview of Abdu'l-Bahā's last sojourn in Egypt, precisely because it was so long. So first off, he arrives in Port Said on June 17th, and a little less than a month later, he leaves for Ismailiyeh for a change of climate. However, the climate in Ismailiyeh turned out not to be very different, so about a week later, he left for Ramleh, a suburb of Alexandria. And that is where he primarily resided for the next 4.5 months. However, he did take a couple of trips within the country afterwards. For example, on October 13th, he went to the small town of Abu Qir, but returned after just 2 days. Then, on November 8th, he went to Port Said and came back about a week later. Eventually, on December 2nd, he left Egypt for the last time and set sail for the Holy Land. While in Port Said, Abdu'l-Bahá would speak at public gatherings under a tent that had been pitched on top of the Hotel Sultani, and it was possible to set up the tent that way because, as you may know, buildings in the Middle East are built with flat roofs. And Abdu'l-Bahá would receive private audiences at the home of Consul Ahmad Effendi Yazdi, who was a Baha'i. Here on the right, we have a photo of that tent on top of the Hotel Sultani. You may notice that Maḥmúd Zarghani is seated in the front row on the right. And I want to point out that this photo actually comes from the original Persian chronicle. There are maybe a handful of such photos that are included in the translation of the book. As was mentioned on the previous slide, Abdu'l-Bahá eventually left Port Said because of its oppressively humid climate, which had a negative effect on his health. But the city he relocated to, called Ismailiyeh, seems to have been just as humid, if not more so. So he left that place too, and ended up in Ramleh, a suburb of Alexandria, where he first lodged at the Hotel Victoria, and then moved into a house that some of the Baha'is rented for him. Abdu'l-Bahā's last sojourn in Ramleh was an eventful one, and we'll get into some of the details of that on the next slide. But one notable thing I want to point out here is that on August 1st, he received his sister, Bahiyeh or Bahá'í Khanum, known as the Greatest Holy Leaf, his daughter, Ziya or Ziyayeh Khanum, and his grandson, Shoghi Effendi, who would have been 16 years old at the time. They all stayed in Ramleh for a little over 2 months before returning. Abdu'l-Bahá also spent quite a bit of this time, that is, in the company of Mirza Abul Fazl, not just visiting and talking with him, but also personally seeing to his recovery since he was not well. And indeed, unfortunately, he would pass away a few months later in Cairo in January 1914. I mentioned I would give you some more details on what Abdu'l-Bahá did during this stay in Ramleh. Here's how Maḥmúd Zarghani has described it. The master sojourned in Ramleh for 5 months. In addition to the Baha'is who came from the east and west to attain his presence, travelers from America and Europe, Jewish teachers from the Syrian Protestant College of Beirut, deputies of the Parliament of Constantinople, and some of the grandees of Egypt, including even the Khedive, meaning Abbas Helmi Pasha, pictured here, attained his presence and benefited from the gracious outpourings of the Abha kingdom on several occasions. They expressed their praise and gratitude for having met him round whom all names revolve. This is a title that Baha'u'llah conferred on Abdu'l-Bahá in Tablet of the Land of Ba, Lawh Arz Ba. And all those blessed souls received his bounty and favor. Now, if you were to look at this paragraph in the context of the book, this one paragraph has several endnotes with additional details on who these people were, when exactly Abdu'l-Bahá met with them, what the circumstances of their meetings were, to the extent that I was able to learn anything about them, and so on. But for the purposes of this presentation, I thought it would suffice to at least give you this high-level summary by Maḥmúd Zarghani, if nothing else. We now arrive at the very last stage, you might say the ultimate destination of Abdu'l-Bahā's journey, his return to the Holy Land, where he would remain for the rest of his life. This is actually the shortest section of the book. It's only about 7 pages long in the translation. But I want to highlight events from 2 of Maḥmúd Zarghani's entries from this period. The day after his arrival in Haifa, Abdu'l-Bahá takes a trip to the shrine of the Bab and finds a nice surprise along the way. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, "As the master was heading for the shrine of the Bab that morning, he found that all the believers, locals and travelers alike, had gathered on Mount Carmel and formed a line in the road he was crossing. When they reached the shrine of the Bab, the master motioned to the friends to enter through the first set of doors. He himself entered through a different door and rested his brow on the sacred threshold. Apart from that particular day, whenever the believers were in his presence as they were making pilgrimage to the shrine of the Bab or Baha'u'llah at other times, the master would first anoint them with fragrant rose water, beckon them to enter, and then perform his own pilgrimage while standing behind everyone else. The next day, at the instruction of Abdu'l-Bahá, the Baha'is take a field trip, if you like, that's how I like to think of it anyway, to the shrine of Baha'u'llah on the outskirts of Akka. Maḥmúd Zarghani writes, in the morning, the master instructed the believers to take a special trip to Akka to make pilgrimage to the shrine of Baha'u'llah. Accordingly, the friends who lived in the vicinity and those who had traveled from afar, nearly 100 people in all, gathered at the train station. The master took a separate railway carriage for himself. When everyone had boarded the train, they found the cars filled to the brim with Baha'is and entirely empty of anyone else. The songs and melodies they lifted up seemed to reach the clouds of the heavens. The radiance that blossomed from their faces could have put the stars and the moon themselves to shame. The joyful congratulations they offered on Abdu'l-Bahā's arrival were enough to shake every limb and reveal the mysteries of the kingdom to every heart. All his ardent lovers intoned, in unison, the odes and other poems of the revered Vargha, the esteemed Andalib, Janab Bassar, and others, clapping and dancing as they sang. And they continued to sing anthems that saluted the master on his arrival up until they reached Akka. Tears fell from their eyes as they humbled themselves in fervent supplication at the threshold of the shrine of Baha'u'llah. They entreated the Abha kingdom to confirm all the Baha'is and implored the aid and bounty of God. When they concluded their pilgrimage, they commenced festivities of heavenly communion in the pilgrim house at the mansion of Bahji. Shortly after concluding that entry, Maḥmúd Zarghani ends his chronicle with some closing remarks. He writes, "Praise be to God, the immeasurably glorious, that through the confirmations of the Abha kingdom and the most exalted horizon, and also the assistance and bounty of Abdu'l-Bahá, may my soul and my very being be offered up for such of his loved ones as are firm in his most perfect covenant. This lowly servant has successfully completed his composition of the first and second volumes of this chronicle. I was graciously aided to record episodes from the master's journey with my own pen and then present him with my account. The manifest traces of his travels have only been chronicled to the extent that my comprehension and capacity have allowed me, not in the plenitude of their peerless glory and grandeur. How well has it been said, as thou art truly in thyself, what eye beholdeth thee? All understand no further than their limited degree. I appeal, therefore, to the bounty and beneficence of the heavenly threshold to forgive and pardon me, and I cherish the hope that the readers of these pages may overlook my shortcomings. Through this humble drop, may they apprehend that sea of divine grace, and regard this insignificant atom as having portrayed the dazzling rays of the sun of celestial favor. Every good thing is of God, and every evil thing is from ourselves. I, the lowly servant, Maḥmúd ibn Ismail Zarghani, do hereby conclude the first and second volumes of this chronicle on the hallowed Mount Carmel, in the vicinity of the shrine of the Bab, and beneath the bountiful shade of Abdu'l-Bahá. May my soul be offered up for the ground which the footsteps of them who are firm in his most perfect covenant have trodden. Maḥmúd ibn Ismail Zarghani, Sunday, July 19th, 1914. And that is the end of my presentation. So I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Q&A, with thanks to all of you for your patience.
You mesmerized us to the extent that look at people's faces, Adib John, yourself. Probably my words are too feeble to explain our feelings. You took us to Europe with the master. You brought us back to Haifa. You took us to pilgrimage. You did a fantastic job. You inspired us all. We thank you. Thank you and thank you, Adib John.
You are very kind, but everything you've said is only a testament to the vividness with which Maḥmúd Zarghani has chronicled this journey. But thank you regardless.
Thank you so much. with your permission, I would receive questions. And Farida Jun, if you let me, I'll start with Aniela, and then after that, I'll come back to you, Farida Jun, with your permission. Aniela, please go ahead.
Beloved Adib, you can never know the glorious heights you've taken us to. I know, and your family knows, how hard, how you've persevered to give us this great gift at this time in our lives, at this time, so that we can study how Abdu'l-Bahá taught, and not just with this magnetism and this, you know, the grace of God, but we have this capacity. He keeps telling us we have this capacity to bring souls closer to this oneness of humankind with logic and science and love. And I can't thank you enough. I have a million questions. And dear friends, you should know that anytime anyone has a question, on the largest Facebook page, Adib will find the most accurate source for you, the most accurate translation, keeping us on the straight path. And his parents are here tonight, and they, I mean, what an honor. I can't imagine as a parent how you must feel, Bijan and Farnaz. Scholars in their own right have given us a more beloved scholar. But my question to you, along with all of the questions I ask you all year long, is there a particular reason you can detect that the beloved master spends such time in Paris at the height of artisans flocking to Paris, and names like Gibran and Tennyson, these very big names are there circling round this orb? Any insights into that?
Well, first of all, Aniela, thank you so much for all of your really exceedingly kind words. You have always been in my corner and in our corner as a family collectively, constantly extending your very kind encouragement and love to us, which is very much mutual. So thank you again for that.
Oh no, it's been hunger. That's all.
I have a couple of insights which are not really my own. They're derived from things that I've read, not in this chronicle, but partially in this chronicle, and also from some of the inferences and deductions made by Jan Yashin, whose excellent book, ʻAbdu'l-Bahá in France, 1911 and 1913, I must recommend once again, as I did earlier, or rather as I should have done. I mentioned it in the presentation, but it deserves every recommendation. That is really the definitive volume on Abdu'l-Bahā's time in France. Yes, you are right that he seems to have spent, meaning Abdu'l-Bahá seems to have spent a disproportionately long amount of time in Paris relative to all the other places covered in this chronicle. And that's not an accident. It's actually quite obvious from reading the events in this translation, in the original book, really, that he didn't enjoy his time in Paris. It was not because he really liked everything that was happening there. I get the sense that it was out of necessity. I think they were the most in need, in contrast to the Baha'is of Germany, who were already so spiritually charged and they were so spiritually developed. I mean, they had the initiative and zeal to host that children's gathering in a smaller city, Esslingen, as you saw. And everyone was so devout that, in typical industrious German fashion, all the children were wearing their uniforms and exclaiming Allahu Akbar. I mean, this makes for a very stark contrast to the whole milieu of Paris, which, as you noted, was, much more, I almost said liberal, but maybe libertine is a better word for it. And it did attract people of a certain bent. That did, I suppose, include some Baha'is. I mean, you mentioned artists. I talked about Frank Edwin Scott, who was a very early American Baha'i. I think at the turn of the century, he converted, he embraced the faith. And he and his wife were among those people you saw in some photographs. But yes, there were certain values that really seemed to have pervaded the whole environment there. And Abdu'l-Bahá detected that. It was palpable, it was regrettable. And I think he hoped that his protracted stay there would have a salutary and edifying effect on the people there. There are other places, I don't think I quoted them in this presentation for obvious lack of space, but he does talk about having sown seeds, as he similarly did in America, and then subsequently expressing the hope that those seeds would sprout and bear fruit. Yeah, I mean, there is, as far as I know, a Baha'i community. There are Baha'i communities all over France today, and I understand them to be quite devout. So I would say those seeds did bear fruit to some extent, but people who know more can speak to that better than I can. But anyway, that's the extent of my insight into that question. And before we move on to the next one, I have to say one thing. I really want to set the record straight about something, but first, let me get a drink of this. There are two people who are present here and who have been present in my life for a very long time that I must call attention to because they each played an indispensable role in the production of this translation. First and foremost, she is also named on the front cover, and she also gave birth to me. She is my mother, Adib Masumian, who, as I mentioned in the foreword to the book, meticulously checked, spending more hours than I can count doing this task, checking every word of the translation against the original. And that was, in and of itself, a major labor of love. And so that needed to be stated and put on the record. And then my dear, as I call him, Ustad, or mentor, Naim Nabil Akbar, again, also thanked quite effusively in the foreword, but I don't know how many people will read that. So I'm going to say it here. Over the past 15 years or so, he has extended such self-sacrificial and expert tutelage, developing my command of Persian to such a point to where it was no longer woeful, or at least less woeful, to the point that I could at least make an attempt at translating this work. So it would not have been possible without the two of them. I thought I would give credit where credit is due.
Ya Bahá, now mention your father.
Yes.
The
yes.
angels of the angels are here.
Yes, yes. My father, of course, the list is too long to enumerate everything he has done for me, but he too is thanked in the foreword for a specific role that he played. He very kindly took the time to read the entire manuscript. He really pored over it and identified many people and places and other items for which a picture might be included in the book. And as a result of that, there are, I think, about 120 images in the book. Compare that to the original chronicle, there are maybe about 6 or 7, of which maybe 2 or 3 I managed to carry over. The others were either of too poor quality, or they just were not maybe that relevant. But so again, he also played quite a key role, apart from just my life in general, quite indispensable where this book is concerned too. So thank you, Aniela. I appreciate that you move the spotlight over to him.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. There are a few questions. I would like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Iskandar Ha'i and also Dr. Anthony Lee. Thank you for joining us. It is a full page. We had about 100 people. I'm sorry if I failed to acknowledge any of the friends who joined us tonight. We appreciate Farnaz Jun. We appreciate you being here with us tonight. Farnaz is the mother. You know how Abdu'l-Bahá talks about how mothers play such great role in raising their children. Thank you, Farnaz. We appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Farida June, please go ahead.
I want to say, Furuzande John, I don't know how you find this jewel. And it's, you know, the people asking, you Baha'i, are you drinking it? I said, yes, the wine of astonishment. I feel it. I was drinking the wine of astonishment, traveled with Abdu'l-Bahá to all the Europe, to Egypt, to Holy Land. Thank you so much, Adib John. I don't know, I was going to, where is your mother? Where is your father? I want to see the picture. You already see, I don't know. They are here. I love to see their face. And also what country you live. By the way, Furuzande John, Aghay Nabil Akbar is there. To grab him for the next time you speak. He's fantastic speaker and he's very knowledgeable like Adib John. I want to tell you. Love you. Thank you.
You don't have to tell me twice. I know how erudite he is. But yes, we live in Austin, Texas. And I don't remember if there was more to that question, but there you go.
Thank you.
Parents here, we can see them.
Oh, they're present. Yeah, they're both here. I don't know how to, I don't think I can shine a spotlight on them or anything, but maybe if you raise your hands or something, you float to the top.
I can spotlight
No,
them both.
that I mean virtually.
Yeah, well, okay.
Oh.
We'll kiss their foreheads for you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes.
We do have Mehdi Wolf. Please go ahead, Mehdi.
Okay. Alaupa Adib Masumian, it's good to talk with you again. I can personally attest I have made many questions on the email list on various things, and Adib is always there to answer questions. So I am so pleased. He has helped in my own research a good bit. So my question is, I was sort of struck by the fact that in all the presentation that you gave, and especially in considering the time Abdu'l-Bahá is doing this journey in Europe, there doesn't seem to be any mention, as there was in his a few times in the United States, where he talks about the forthcoming First World War. Are there mentions of the forthcoming war in his travels in Europe?
I don't recall any mentions of World War II, certainly not explicitly, but not even obliquely. But especially toward the beginning of the book, he does mention the Balkan War. You know, now that I think about it, yeah, he mentions the First Balkan War that I believe had already broken out, or it was soon to break out, perhaps. They were right on the heels of it. And I think by way of that, he talked about Europe. We hear a similar analogy about it being like an arsenal of explosives that needs only a single spark to catch fire and explode. I think there is some language that is similar to that to maybe foreshadow the war that would eventually result from this very agitated state that Europe is in. But again, it was done quite obliquely, and it was done in connection with that First Balkan War. That's the extent of what I remember. And I think he talked about it in England. So again, some of those earlier months, probably because as it was Abdu'l-Bahá's custom to read the newspapers every day, if I remember correctly, those were probably some of the accounts that he was reading about how the Balkans were in a state of severe agitation and that it seemed like anything could set them off at any moment. So it was probably occasioned by those headlines and reports that he might say something. But even when he did, whether it was the Balkan War or something to come after that, it was very brief. On each of the occasions that I can count on one hand, probably, that he did this, it was never more than a sentence or two. At least that's the extent of what Maḥmúd Zarghani recorded. And I believe Sohrab's account mirrors about the same. So yeah, that's what I remember.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Shahnarjun, before we come to you, if you permit me, there has been a question, and there have been many questions. One of them is, thank you, Adib. I will certainly get hold of your book. Is the supplement accessible at your website? Kanta Kumar wrote that.
It is. Thank you, Akanta, for the question. It is available on my website, but there's a more direct way than that to get to it. I'm going to look for it right now and get you the link right here. Give me just a second and I will put it in the chat.
Do you ever sleep?
Not enough, maybe, but I do. I average maybe about 6 hours. Let me see. Oh, it's not showing. Yeah. 1 second. It's doing it in such a way that it's not the URL It's just the name of the page. There we go.
Are
Yeah.
you putting it in chat? Yes.
Yes, just did.
Perfect. Thank you. And also, Leslie, dearest Leslie, Dr. Alpert wrote, most informative, appreciate your suggestion that more people learn Persian and Arabic. Any more suggestions? Adib?
I can only drill down on that one because there are so many tablets in which Abdu'l-Bahá says, not in so many words, but basically that translations are ultimately never going to be anything more than approximations of the original. And there's one where he says that the word of God, one is the word of God and the other has proceeded from the pen of man. Or rather, one has proceeded from the mouth of God, the other was written by the pen of man, referring to original revelation versus a translation, respectively. And there are at least two or three other tablets that I can think of on this theme. Actually, a few of them are on my website, so if you care to sift through them. I don't think there are enough people pushing that cause, and it's one that I do deeply believe in. And it's one that, again, my dear mentor, Naim Nabil has really impressed on me, and it is not lost on me. So I think we all would do well to heed that and try to learn it to the best of our ability. Clearly, as we saw in the case of Edith Sanderson, it would have pleased, and it did please Abdu'l-Bahá very greatly to learn either language. There are many accounts of this in Persian, his being pleased by it. And there's even one in with regard to Arabic, that there was an early British Baha'i, I think she was the first British Baha'i woman, Mary Thornburg Cropper. And she was learning Arabic, and Abdu'l-Bahá in a tablet to her encouraged her to continue that. That also is on my website if you care to look for it. But yes, so I hope that advice will not fade into obscurity after the passage of so much time, but that people do take it to heart. That's all I'll say on that.
Thank you, Adib John. Thank you. Shahla Jun, go for it.
Thank you so much, Adib John. Truly, absolutely fantastic. I have a few questions. One is that I was lucky enough when I was very young to pass through Pakistan and have the first printing of the Maḥmúd's diary, which was done in India. When I was in Pakistan, I was told that the books that were printed were taken to Pakistan to be sent to Iran, and they were not able to. And I actually saw all the books there. And I'm wondering if you have heard anything about that, or if in the later years, this is many years ago when I was a child, is it still sitting there, or have they been able to get them out in any way, form, or shape? Because I was lucky enough, and they were very kind to give me, and they are a little bit eaten up because they're sitting in storage, but I adore that book more than any of the other copies. I don't know if you have heard any of that. That's my first question. Have you heard anything about that?
Not very much, I have to be honest. There are probably people on the call more knowledgeable in that regard than I am. If your question, if I understood it correctly, is whether those original copies made it out and are extant, they've still survived. I know that at least some of them have, because Ustad, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Naim Nabil, who is among us, has the original, at least volume 2, if memory serves. There it is. Had it at the ready. That's the original one from 100 years ago. Whereas I am relatively unlucky. I only have the reprint from Bahá'í Verlag in 1987, in which a couple of the pages have actually been switched mistakenly. But the original one has not. That does not suffer from that error. So whoever has it, you're lucky to have it. I just remember that both volumes were published in Bombay, one in 1914, one in 1921, by two different publishing trusts. The second one was Karimi Press. I don't remember the first one. And they evidently survived for the next 6.5 decades or so, and then they were reprinted in Germany. And that's what is available fully on the old Baha'i reference library, reference.baha'i.org, not the new one, baha'i.org/library. I don't think you can buy that anymore. I think it's out of print. So if in the past 40 years, you were lucky to have lucky enough to be able to procure that Bahá'í Verlag reprint, then good for you. Otherwise, you have to rely on the digital copies, as far as I know. I haven't seen a Bahá'í publisher carry it. So, Shahla, to answer your question, if anyone else happens to know more about the journey of those books and how they made it to where they are today, then please chime in. But that's the extent of my knowledge.
Before Shahla asks the second question, could I ask Tara as well as Gary to stay with us for the devotional part, please? Don't. Hi, Tara. Thank you very much for coming. Hi. And hi, Gary. Please stay with us. Go ahead. Shahla, please go ahead.
Yes, I live in Montreal, and in one of the bedrooms, actually the bedroom that used to be guest room and then eventually Rui Khanum's bedroom as a child, there's a photograph, one of two of Abdu'l-Bahá, that apparently was taken in a studio, the only two. And I'm wondering if this was during this trip or the first trip, and if you know if this is true.
Your microphone is off. Adib, you cannot hear.
Sorry about that. Thank you for letting me know. I don't recall reading that in any of the accounts, whether it was Maḥmúd Zarghani's or Sohrab's or any other contemporaneous record. So if I'm not mistaken, the only conclusion I can draw is that it was in the first sojourn, being mid to late 1911. But again, if I'm wrong about that, I hope someone will let me know.
We lived in Egypt. And we lived in Ramleh, not far from the house. And of course, at that time, the Baha'is did not show the house to anyone if they could help it, because it was supposed to be not safe. I'm wondering if there was any detail you see in any of the writings that gives more, because I know exactly where it is, but I have not mentioned it to anyone. But I'm wondering if there's any mention of it. Also, I understand that Abdu'l-Bahá walked along the ocean side, not far from Ramleh. And there's also a very well-known coffee shop there. Is there any mention of Abdu'l-Bahá visiting Perstrudi, which is a very famous coffee shop in that area?
No, not the coffee shop, but that's such a distinct detail that I feel like I would have remembered that. But he does talk about, there was one day in particular, he walked up to the statue of Ferdinand de Lesseps, who I guess helped build the Suez Canal. So that is mentioned explicitly, and I think his retinue members accompanied him, because Sohrab says the same thing in his diary letter for that day. So I recall that. And as far as his residences, where he lodged, I covered quite a bit. I guess that was more of a bird's eye zoomed out view, because I also talked about Port Said and Ismailia, but Ramleh specifically, I think I had a slide that mentioned that for the first couple of weeks, he stayed at the Hotel Victoria, or Victoria Hotel. I've seen it referred to as two different ways, or in two different ways rather. And after that, the Baha'is were able to rent a property for him near a train station called Mazlum Pasha. It was named after one of these Ottomans, I suppose, these Ottoman officials or diplomats. And if I remember correctly, that is where he stayed. Again, he made a couple of brief trips away from Ramleh after that. He went to a small town called Abu Qir for a couple of days in October, and then in November, he went to Port Said for a week. But he had set up base, as it were, or camp in Ramleh, and it is very condensed, like I mentioned, Zarghani's account of it. I mean, if the first, I'm going to just pull these numbers out of thin air, they're rough estimates. If the first, 330 pages of the book in the original Persian refer to his European travels, it's the latter 35 to 40 that have to do with Europe. And then the last maybe 5 that cover the Holy Land. So with that kind of representation, first of all, it explains why I kept the title in English more condensed and I only called it Abdu'l-Bahá in Europe. Yes, he did go to a couple of other places after that, but it represents 90% of the book, maybe content-wise. And second, it results in not having a whole lot of information. It is unique in that we don't, if you subtract Sohrab's account and if you take away Mahmúd Zarghani's account, we don't have a whole lot of insight into what happened in the latter half of 1912 in Egypt when Abdu'l-Bahá was there. That they are really the primary sources, as far as I know. There's a gentleman who is working on, he's writing a history of the Baha'i faith in Egypt, I think at the request of the Universal House of Justice. His name is Gamal Hassan. He lives in Uganda. Long time, decades-long pioneer through Uganda. And when I shared this portion of the book with him, I think he mentioned that this kind of opened his eyes to some things. Like even someone who was this familiar and has been tasked with a project of this caliber and scale, the details in this book, which had not been previously accessible to him, kind of broaden his horizons a little bit. So brief and condensed as it may be, it's still what we have at this time. Maybe future scholarship will reveal more, but again, that's the extent of what I know on the subject.
My last question, I'm sorry. It's about Stanwood Cobb. I met him when he was quite old, almost 100, at Greenacre. And he told me that Abdu'l-Bahá had told him that if he is good, he lives to be 100. We celebrated his 100th birthday and he passed away after that. I'm wondering if you've seen anywhere, actually this as mentioned in any of the documents you've seen. He told me, but I haven't seen it anywhere.
I've never seen that statement. I can only deduce based on what you've told me that it's a pilgrim note, but it's a very beautiful one at that. Those certainly have their place in our literature and textual history and oral history. But the only thing I can say with respect to Stanwood Cobb is that my parents are both quite envious of you, I'm sure, because they had an opportunity in the DC or Virginia area, I forget where exactly, to see Stanwood Cobb in probably around 1979 or 1980. And, being brand new to this country and not really knowing who he was, they passed up on that opportunity. And I think they've been regretting it ever since. So I'm very glad that you were able to go. I'm sure, they were with you in spirit.
Everybody could see him if you went to Greenacre, you could get a chance to go and visit him. He lived very close to Greenacre.
That's wonderful. And what a beautiful setting. Wow.
Thank you.
Before I get Aniela and Mr. Taherzadeh, I would like to take the opportunity to read a few messages that has been written in the chat. So illuminating and humbling. Thank you, Adib. Greetings from Sydney, Australia. Thank you, Adib. Thank you, Adib. I will certainly get hold of your book. Then Allah Apha, dear Adib. Thank you so much. Most informative, appreciate your suggestions that more people have to learn Persian and Arabic. I love this presentation. Thank you. A great, inspiring presentation. Dr. Iskandar Hai, great talk. Much thanks. Allah Apha, how do I access recorded? You can always go to the Baha'is of Oakville and this will be uploaded tomorrow. All our firesides will be uploaded. Allah Abha, and thank you so very much for the inspiring presentation. The other one, difficult to express my gratitude. Thank you, Adib. Marsha, wonderful and inspiring. Thank you so very much. Saniata, thank you so much, Adib. Such a great relation of Abdu'l-Bahá's journey. I very much learned so much. And it just goes on and on and on. So go ahead, Mr. Taherzadeh. Aniela, don't go too far.
Again, thank you. Thank you very much for a beautiful and comprehensive presentation. Here's my question. As someone like yourself who has consciously, from a Western culture, tried to learn Persian and Arabic, what can you tell the rest of us, those who are present, those who are wondering or idealizing learning to some degree Persian, Arabic? What can you tell us? What special qualities did you find? Because you did this consciously and purposefully. So what can you tell us? What is so special about the Persian, the Arabic, especially in the context of the Baha'i revelation? Because this is a new cycle of human history, and the manifestations of God for the opening of this universal cycle. They have chosen Arabic and chosen Persian. What special qualities have you found in these two languages? Maybe this might give people, the rest of us, some idea of what we are facing with these two languages. Thank you.
Sure. No, it's an excellent question. I think I should maybe divide that question up into Persian and Arabic in the context of this chronicle, which I initially got the impression that's what you were asking about. And then I think maybe it shifted into Persian and Arabic as languages of revelation in the context of original language Baha'i revelation, which the latter of those two actually overlaps with a question that I noticed Mehdi Wolf asked in the chat. So this is quite serendipitous. I think I can maybe address both. I'd like to try anyway. So in the context of this chronicle, one thing to know is that the Persian of Maḥmúd Zarghani is, from the standpoint of vocabulary, it is indisputably old-fashioned a bit by today's standards. There are a lot of words he uses that are not used anymore. The syntax is often challenging. The sentences are long. They can and often should be broken up into several sentences in English, as I've tried to do in some cases where the situation demanded it. So patience is definitely one virtue that at least one should strive for or aspire to in undertaking this work. And a lot of the meanings, in addition, I should say, in addition to the language being a bit old-fashioned, I don't mean to use that disparagingly. I'm trying to be neutral about it. Language just gets a bit outdated over time, and new words come and take the place of older ones. But as a result of that, also meanings change too. Newer meanings supersede older ones. And there's a very good example that Naim John drew my attention to a while ago, which is that there's a part where, while in Europe, meeting with women suffragists who were fighting for the right to vote, Abdu'l-Bahá counsels them not to try and achieve this end through zajr. And this is a word that has often come to mean things like agony and pain and that sort of thing in modern Persian. Whereas in Arabic, which is the language from which it originally comes, and in the context of this chronicle having been written 110 years ago, it has more to do with coercion and compulsion, or maybe even obstruction, but definitely the first two. And for that reason, one must always doubt one's initial intuition, I suppose, and have a very, very, very good dictionary handy. If we're talking about Persian, or frankly, Arabic that has permeated Persian to a sufficient degree, the dictionary of Ali Akbar de Khuda, I don't think you can do any better than that. He was a genius, and he was a lexicographer bar none. I think when he died, Abbas Mirani writes in Eminent Persians, one of his 2 volumes on that subject, he says that they looked at his estate, the people who came in after his death, and found definitions of words written on napkins, scrawled. I mean, this was a man who was a logophile to the extreme, and it showed in everything that he did. And we would do well, it would behoove us to benefit from the natural tendencies and sheer genius of someone like that. And this is not something that's limited to hard copy. There is a website called Vajeyab. This is another thing that Naim John introduced me to many years ago. I can type it out in the chat later. For those of you who are literate in Persian, you would benefit immensely from having this at your disposal. It's a search engine that has a few other dictionaries incorporated into it, such as that of Muhammad Moin and Hassan Amid, and several other tools besides. So that is an excellent tool, basically that can maybe disabuse you of any initial impressions that you may have of what a certain word means. This Zaj one was an example. There's another one about tashkhis, where he was using it with respect to a play Abdu'l-Bahá was about the birth of Jesus Christ. Tashkhis al-Wiladat Hazrat Masih. And you may wonder, well, does he mean distinguishing or distinction or identifying, which tashkhis seems to have some of those meanings maybe nowadays. But no, it actually has to do with portrayal and in playing a role. It makes perfect sense in the context of a theatrical performance. So again, this is one of those things where if you just rely on, and I know I did this, definitely, I relied on faulty intuition in the beginning, but then I was chastened both through outside counsel and just doubt that crept in later, which I did not have early on, but which I later came to appreciate and possess, to rely more and more on dictionaries that belonged to a time that was closer to the time in which this book was written, and not to rely on my own, frankly, non-native fluency and perhaps flawed intuition. And of course, benefiting from the help of outside experts as well, people who really know that brand, that style, that flavor of the original language very well. That is a combination that is nurun ala nur, as Abdu'l-Bahá says, light upon light. I think that's all I want to say about Persian and Arabic in the context of the Chronicle. In the context of this revelation, yeah, I mean, there is a tablet in which Baha'u'llah says, all of the Baha'i Arabs I know love to quote this one, that he would make Arabic, if it were his will, the universal language of the world. But then, for many reasons, says that this will not be the case. And he does not say that, but Abdu'l-Bahá after him in the first volume of Maḥmúd's diary is asked, will that happen? And he says, no, it will not. It will be something else. But in any case, they are incredibly powerful and potent languages of revelation. Persian, especially for its poetry, Arabic for a different sort of eloquence. Persian is often called the sweet tongue, lisan-e shirin or mali by Baha'u'llah, and lisan-e, I believe, fasih or certainly Fosa. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, please, from where Arabic is concerned by Baha'u'llah. So again, we would do very well, I think, to learn those. But as for how to go about doing it, I have to at the risk of sounding vain, shamelessly plug an initiative that a friend of mine, Violetta Zain, and I in Congo, she and I started a few years ago called the Utterance Project, in which we have produced videos of recitations of the Baha'i writings in video form, in which chunks of Baha'i writings appear on screen with 3 different pieces of text. There is the authorized English translation, and we will only do things with authorized English translations, no provisional ones, so that we can be certain of their accuracy. And then a transliteration underneath, meaning the original sounds, the phonetics, but represented in Latin and Roman characters, so that people who are not familiar with the original language can read it and learn how to pronounce the sounds. And then, of course, the original language itself, so that with time, hopefully one will gradually move from reading the or having to rely on the transliteration to understanding the letters and what sounds the letters represent. Where the Arabic is concerned, we've tried to add the short vowel marks, to help clarify the syntax and the grammar, and also just how the words themselves should be pronounced, because those things are not often written out. So that, I think, can be hopefully a useful tool. We've gotten some feedback to the effect that it is, at least some people have found it to be so. If you were to look up the Utterance Project online, you would find our YouTube channel where those videos reside, and also just our website, which is theutteranceproject.com, which links to those videos and many other resources in addition to that. And then, but as far as where to start, I mean, you can dive into the Utterance Project, but there are maybe about 70 videos there to date, and they range from anything to, they range from one of the hidden words or several of the hidden words, be they in Persian or Arabic, to the long obligatory prayer or the fire tablet or the Loh-e Naghus, the tablet of the bell. We have videos on all of these. But I don't think you would want to start with any of those last few that I mentioned. That's quite daunting, and you may be doing yourself a disservice in doing that. It probably would be wise, this is the method that my own Ustad took with me, and I found it to be very instructive and exemplary, is to start small. There is a lot of wisdom to that adage, and it can be applied in so many contexts. You can what starting small looks like with the Baha'i writings is starting with the hidden words. You can just put the authorized English translation, the last ones that Shoghi Effendi did of that work, side by side with the original Persian or Arabic, as the case may be, depending on what your goal is. And you just take it bit by bit. You try to understand what is being said, what the grammar of it is. Ideally, you would do this under the tutelage of somebody competent. If you can find, you know, a native speaker of Persian or a native speaker of Arabic, again, ideally a Baha'i in your community who can help you with those things, you really can't do any better than that because you will have native intuition on your side. Failing that, I could maybe cautiously recommend using some free AI to give you grammatical and syntactical breakdowns. I've done this in the past and I've had mixed results, but I would say more accurate than not. I'd say maybe 75 to 80% accurate than not. If you give it a sentence or something from Baha'u'llah, you could say, give me a diagram this sentence for me and give me a grammatical or syntactical breakdown as what is being said, or even add Arabic vowel marks to this piece of Arabic text. And you would be amazed actually at how good a job GPT-4 or Claude 3 Opus does with those things. It's also been immensely useful to my own work. But again, those things really, they shouldn't be the end result. If at all possible, you should run them by somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, if you have that luxury. But it can be useful maybe as an aid. I don't think it can steer you flagrantly wrong, but hopefully it'll help more than harm. So hopefully, Riyaz-Jan, I answered both dimensions of that question and maybe also answered Mehdi Wolf's question in the chat. And I'd like to take this opportunity very quickly. First of all, Dad, thank you for posting vojayub.com. I appreciate that. I'd forgotten that I said I was going to do that. There was another question in the chat from a very long time ago that I never addressed, and I do not want it to fall by the wayside. A gentleman named Khosro, about an hour and a half ago, I hope he's still with us, asked, are there any written comments or documents on what Abdu'l-Bahá and Edward Brown spoke about? Yes, there are. It ranged from a variety of things. Basically, they talked about the East and the West. What I mean by that is really current affairs that were going on in the East, you know, like what the political climate was there and so on and so forth. They also talked about the immortality of the soul and life after death. There's actually a tablet that Abdu'l-Bahá, it's in one of the volumes of Maida Asamani, I think volume 9. And it is a tablet to Edward Brown, and he is talking about the immortality of the soul. And the context for that tablet is that a couple of months earlier in England, Brown had expressed an interest in this subject, but for lack of time, they didn't get to talk about it. But so then when they met later, or in between that meeting, he wrote that tablet. And then when they finally met for the last time in Paris, he gave him a pamphlet of some kind. I don't know. I think it was some kind of collection of Baha'u'llah's writings on the subject. Abdu'l-Bahá handed this to him. So yes, they were very long conversations. Like I mentioned, I don't have much insight into the length of the Paris one, if I remember correctly, but the two meetings that happened in London on December 18th and 19th. December 18th was an hour and December 19th was 2 hours. That's a very long time to be speaking to someone, especially in Persian, which in Brown's case was certainly not his native language, but it shows what a command of it he had. And of course, his letters in Persian exist, including the ones that he wrote to Abdu'l-Bahá. You can find them in a book that the late Mr. Boulyouzi wrote called, and which his protege Mujan Momen finished, called Edward Granville Brown and the Baha'i Faith. That book may be out of print, but if not, you can find it on George Ronald's site. Yeah, so in fact, that book in and of itself might be able to shed a little bit more light on the things they talked about. Certainly within this chronicle, you'll find some details to that effect, but all I mean to say is that might be another good source to read in addition to that one. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Adib Jan, what an energy you have. Wow. MashaAllah. Thank you so much. Friends, it's 10 after 9. We usually finish the fireside at 8:30 and we move into our devotions. But tonight was so interesting that we wanted to continue this. Aniela, may I not get your question? And since you're going to see Adib John, maybe you can ask him yourself, and can we go to, if possible, to the devotional part by any chance?
I was going to say that, and we can hear the beauty of the original language calling out to God from Tara.
Thank you so much. Friends, let me first of all find a way to thank Adib, and I can't do that. Probably I have to go back to university for 15 more years and study English in order to be able to offer my gratitude to you. All I can say is that I love you very much. To me, you are a doctor, whether you accept it or not. That's not my business, but you are a doctor. We're going to, I'm very grateful for the friends in Australia and other places who went and gave a ride to their family and came back. Mr. Perimal, thank you for coming back. Thank you, the friends from Malaysia, 7 o'clock in the morning. I am embarrassed to even say thank you. I know that Pina is here, Tara is here, also Gary. I don't see Gary, but I see only the name. Is it possible that we start with Tara? Okay, perfect. And Gary, you, and then Pina and everyone else. Also, I wanted to thank everyone, including Dr. Hai. This is the first time I'm seeing him after a long time. It brings back memories of his father and my father. Ruheshun Shad. Thank you for joining us tonight, Dr. Hai. Tara John, go ahead, please.
I'm going to chant hidden verse number 18. If you have the English version, you can follow me if you like. به نام گوینده توانا ای اهل فردوس برین اهل یقین را اخبار نمایید که در فضای قرب رضوان روزه جدیدی ظاهر گشته اهل یقین را اخبار نمایید که در فضای قدس قرب رضوان روزه جدیدی ظاهر گشته و جمیع اهل عالین و هیاکل
خلد برین طائفه حول آن گشتند. پس جهدی نمایید تا به آن مقام درآیید و حقایق اسرار عشق را از شقایقش جویید و جمیع حکمت‌های بالغه هدیه را از اسمار باقیش بیابید. پس جهدی نمایید تا به آن مقام درآیید و حقایق اسرار عشق را از شقایقش جویید و جمیع حکمت‌های بالغه احدیه را از اسمار باقیش بیابید. غرد أبصار الذين هم دخلوا فيها آمنين.
ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, ʻAbdu'l-Bahá. ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, ʻAbdu'l-Bahá. ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, ʻAbdu'l-Bahá. Oh, my Lord and my Master. Oh, my desired one and my beloved and the beloved of all that are in the heavens and on the earth, I beseech thee to grant from the ocean of thy knowledge and the day star of thy heavenly grace, that I may be cursed, reviled, and denounced a myriad times for the sake of thy love, that these ears of mine may but once be blessed
by hearing thy sweet words. Verily, thou art of the people of Bahá. Verily, thou art of the people of Bahá. Verily, thou art of the people of Bahá.
Healing prayer in Arabic for the ailing friends. Ya Ilahi, اسمك شفاعي وذكرك دوائي وقربك رجائي وحبك مونسي ورحمتك طبيبي ومعيني في الدنيا والآخرة وإنك أنت المطيع العليم الحكيم إنك أنت المطيع العليم الحكيم حضرت بهاءالله. Oh God. We can't hear you, Firuz John. We cannot hear you.
Thank you, Pina, for always being there. Aniela, can you say a prayer for departed? I have dedicated the devotional part of this fireside to my brother-in-law, whom I owe my life to, a pioneer to the Netherlands, Dr. Jovdan. May I ask you, Aniela, to do that? Gary, would you like to say a prayer, another prayer? It seems that Aniela. Mr. Liu, Juliet, is your internet okay? Would you like to say a prayer? Friends, does anybody want to say a prayer? Okay.
Thank you. You unmuted us.
Oh, I apologize. I have never muted everyone, but I don't know. how this happened. Aniela, I apologize.
No, my love. One moment, please.
Thank you.
Oh my God, O thou forgiver of sins, bestower of gifts, dispeller of afflictions. Verily, I beseech thee to forgive the sins of such as have abandoned the physical garment and have ascended to the spiritual world. O my Lord, purify them from trespasses, dispel their sorrows, and change their darkness into light. Cause them to enter the garden of happiness. Cleanse them with the most pure water, and grant them to behold thy splendors on the loftiest mount.
Oh my God, verily thy servant, humble before the majesty of thy divine supremacy, lowly at the door of thy oneness, had believed in thee and in thy verses, had testified to thy word, had been enkindled with the fire of thy love, had been immersed in the depth of the ocean of thy knowledge, had been attracted by thy breezes, had relied upon thee, had turned his face to thee, had offered his supplication to thee, and had been assured of thy pardon and forgiveness. He had abandoned this mortal life and had flown to the kingdom of immortality, yearning for the favor of meeting thee. O Lord, glorify his station, shelter him under the pavilion of thy supreme mercy, cause him to enter thy glorious paradise and perpetuate his existence in thine exalted rose garden, that he may plunge into the sea of light in the world of mysteries. Verily, thou art the generous, the powerful, the forgiving, and the bestower.
I wonder if I can say a prayer in French for the departed.
Is there any remover of difficulties? Save God, save, praise be God. He is God, all are his servants, and all abide by his bidding.
Thank you. Anne, go ahead with the French prayer, please.
Ô mon Dieu, toi qui pardonnes mes péchés, dispense les bienfaits, dissipe les afflictions. En vérité, je te supplie de pardonner les péchés de ceux qui ont abandonné l'enveloppe physique et se sont élevés vers le monde spirituel. Ô mon Seigneur, efface leurs transgressions, dissipe leurs peines et change leurs ténèbres en lumière. Ouvre-leur le jardin du bonheur, purifie-les par l'eau la plus limpide et accorde-leur de contempler tes splendeurs du monde le plus élevé. Abdu'l-Bahá.
Dear friends, what a beautiful evening this was. Such a beautiful evening we had with Adib, his family, his teacher, his ustad, his friends. Everybody was here, is here. Thank you for participating.
Don't make us go home.
You know that I can never do that, Aniela. It's just that I'm sure Adib is exhausted and Dr. Masumian is sitting there mazloom and quiet. I can't impose myself. Please stay as long as you want. It's just that there will be no question and answer.
I will behave.
Feroz,
Yes.
just a moment ago, we had 27 people, the rebirth of the 27 letters of knowledge.
Oh,
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Mehdi. That's lovely. Thank you so much.
so sweet.
I know we can always count on Mehdi to see the significance in numbers. It's beautiful, actually. Most of the queries that he mentioned before on Baha'i list, they do pertain to that subject, and I think he is more practiced and versed in that subject than the majority of Baha'is. I love it.
And I became a Baha'i on the 27th of February, 1972. 27272. 2 plus 7, 9.
Yes.
That's even more significant.
And Pina is coming from the Philippines, and she speaks Arabic, Farsi fluently, English, and you name it.
And
God
I want to
bless you.
introduce you, Andiane Bellevaux. She's one of the early French-Canadian Baha'is of Canada. She's a beloved friend, and I love her very much. Thank you for the French prayer. Thank you, Andiane.
Andiane, please write down your email address so we would be able to trace you and send you invitation. Maybe I should pause the recording right now.